All right, so today we're going to dive into what is basically a spiritual operating manual from the ancient world. Seriously, it's this incredibly detailed set of laws that dictated everything. I mean, everything from life and death to exactly how you were supposed to approach the divine. It's a really fascinating peek into a world that was trying to figure out what it means to be sacred.
And really, it all boils down to this one big question. What does it actually take to get close to the divine? I mean, think about it. For the ancient Israelites, the answer wasn't just, have faith. No way. It was this complex, super carefully structured set of protocols, all designed to bridge that immense gap between the human and the holy.
So right at the heart of all these rules, you find the sacred offering. Before we get into who could do what and when, we've got to wrap our heads around this concept. Because these offerings, they weren't just a meal. They were a physical, tangible link between people and God, and you had to handle them with extreme care.
And check this out. This is the very first instruction given, which is really telling, right? It's not about some complicated ritual or a specific action. It's about an attitude, respect. That one word just sets the tone for everything else. It makes it crystal clear that the number one concern is making sure the holy isn't dishonored.
So to really get what they were aiming for, we have to understand this word profane. See, the biggest danger here wasn't just, oops, I broke a rule. It was blurring the line between the sacred and the ordinary. It was about treating something that was set apart for God as if it were just common.
Okay, so that brings us to the people who were actually in charge of this whole system, the ones designated to handle all these sacred items. We're talking about the priests. And you guessed it, they had their own super strict set of rules for maintaining what you could call ceremonial readiness. And here's the core rule for them. A priest who was ceremonially unclean could not, under any circumstances, come near the sacred offerings. Now, it's so important to get this. Uncleanness here wasn't about being a bad person or committing a sin. Think of it more like a temporary state, a condition that was just incompatible with the sacred space. It was something that had to be resolved before they could get back to work.
And if you look at the specific things that caused this state, well, it's pretty interesting. You see stuff like skin diseases, bodily discharges, touching a corpse. What do they all have in common? They're all tied to these really powerful, messy forces of life and death, sickness and decay. Things that, for a time, put a person outside the state of wholeness that was required for sacred duties.
So if a priest found himself in this unclean state, how did he get back to being clean? Well, the solution wasn't some big, mysterious, complicated thing. It was actually a really clear two-step process. First, a physical cleansing, bathe with water. And second, a period of waiting, until sundown. That single ritual marked a clear transition back to being ready for service.
Okay, so let's get practical for a second. These offerings were often food. So who was actually allowed to eat them after they were consecrated? This is where it gets really interesting, because the rules created some very, very clear social boundaries.
And this chart just lays it all out perfectly. Look at this. It wasn't about who you liked or who worked for you. It was all about whether you belonged to the priest's household. So, slaves that he owned, they were in. But a temporary hired worker? Nope, out. A daughter who married and left the family? She was out. But if she was widowed or divorced and came back home, she was back in. It's all about that core household identity.
So what happened if someone who wasn't authorized ate the sacred food by mistake? Well, there was a specific penalty. They had to repay the full value of what they ate and then add a 20% tax on top of it. And this wasn't just a punishment, It was a way of symbolically restoring the sacred value of what was lost, of making it whole again.
All right, let's switch gears. We've talked about the people, now let's talk about the offerings themselves. If you're going to present a gift to God, what should that gift look like? Unsurprisingly, the law had a very, very clear answer for that.
The guiding principle was, in a word, perfection. Any animal brought for a sacrifice had to be without defect, without a single blemish. And the logic here is pretty straightforward, right? Offering something that's broken or second-rate, well, that would be a huge act of disrespect. You give your absolute best, period.
And believe me, the law does not leave this up to your imagination. Oh no, it gets incredibly specific. I mean, look at this list: blindness, injuries, warts, sores, even down to bruised or crushed testicles. Any little sign of imperfection meant the animal was totally unacceptable for this sacred purpose. And get this, even a physically perfect animal wasn't good to go right away. It had to stay with its mother for 7 full days. It was only on the 8th day that it became acceptable as an offering.
This rule kind of builds in a rhythm, a respect for the natural order of life.
And then, right in the middle of all these strict formal laws, you find this. Do not slaughter a cow or a sheep and its young on the same day. I mean, wow. It's this remarkable moment of profound, almost tender consideration. It shows a clear ethical line in the sand, a prohibition against an act that would be seen as just cruel. It's this little layer of compassion tucked inside the legal code. So, after going through all these specifics about who can do what kind of animal to bring, when to do it, we have to step back and ask the big question. Why? What was the ultimate point of this whole intricate system? Well, the final part of the text gives us the answer.
As you read through all these laws, you start to notice something. A specific phrase pops up again and again and again. It's like a divine signature at the bottom of the page, the ultimate source of authority that validates every single command. It's the final answer to any question of but why.
And this is it. I am the Lord. Simple, direct, absolute. The rules aren't up for debate, they're not a negotiation, they are grounded in the very identity of the one who gave them. That phrase just ends the argument and establishes the foundation for the entire system. So when you put it all together, you see that these laws were anything but random. They were a blueprint, a master plan for shaping an entire culture. By constantly separating the holy from the common, the clean from the unclean, they were forging a totally distinct identity for the Israelites, an identity that was centered on their unique relationship with God.
And this, right here, is the ultimate takeaway. The text doesn't say, I am the Lord who watches to see if you can make yourselves holy. It says, I am the Lord who makes you holy. You see the difference? Holiness, in the end, isn't just about human effort and following all the rules perfectly. It's presented as a gift, a state of being that is given by the divine.
So if we're going to boil it all down, what are the big takeaways? First, holiness demands clear boundaries between the sacred and the everyday. Second, it all starts with an attitude of profound respect. Third, only your absolute best is a worthy offering. And finally, all of it is grounded in divine authority. That's the whole system in a nutshell. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. These laws might feel ancient, maybe even a little strange to us, but the human impulse behind them, that's not distant at all. Every society, whether it's in a courthouse, a sports stadium, or a church, creates rules to define what's important, what's special, and what is sacred. So the question for us is, how do we see that same dynamic playing out in our world today?